The last time we talked about Outriders was all the way back in February of this year. This is the upcoming third-person RPG shooter, or looter shooter, and as many of you may know, I'm a fan of these kind of games. This particular one is set in this dark sci-fi universe. There will be 4 classes with unique skills, passives, and playstyles, loads of gear to collect as you chase certain stats, traits, levels, and rarities, a wide variety of locations to explore, enemies, monsters, and bosses to fight, and endgame progression through this world tier system. There's also drop-in, drop-out co-op, as this game supports groups of up to 3. There'll be character customization, and a fully voiced story campaign. This is also the game with those screenshots that make it look exactly like Destiny, but it's not Destiny, I promise. Now, when I released that first video, there had just been this major press event for the game. Thanks for the invite, by the way, really appreciate that. That went over a lot of the basic information, but in the months since then, we've gotten actually several developer broadcasts going into a bit more depth. We got detail on how endgame progression through the world tier system will work, a look at the world's structure of hubs and spokes, more specifics as well as gameplay for the Pyromancer, Trickster, and Devastator, as well as the reveal of the 4th and final class, the Technomancer. And then we also saw some stuff about UI customization, a sneak peek of how special items in the game can change up skills, opening different play styles. And overall, with everything that I've seen, all of these trailers and all of these gameplay footage, I'm actually pretty impressed. Like, my early thoughts are that this is looking to shape up to be a pretty good game, especially for something that wasn't on my radar and is launching this holiday season. I really think that this may be something to keep an eye on. So what I want to do here in this video is cover all of the new information and show you guys the details that we've gotten over these past few months. But in case you missed that first video, let's just do a quick recap of the basic structure of Outriders. So again, this is a third-person looter shooter. The developer has said that they're kind of trying to focus on delivering this powerful gameplay experience with a world that's fun to explore and shooting that feels good. It's a very traditional-looking third-person shooter. You know, you've got the snap into cover, pop up, shoot, mantle over objects, and then of course there's the inclusion of these magical skills. And overall, it seems like combat is this healthy mix of shooting your gun and using your abilities. Players will have access to 3 weapons, as well as 3 skills and a special melee attack for every single class. And there's lots of RPG or even you might call MMO light elements, like we've got character levels, world tiers, quest with objectives. Enemies have nameplates over their head displaying their health level and any debuff info. I mean, it really seems just like a third-person looter shooter through and through. We can make some pretty clear comparisons to games like The Division, Warframe, or Remnant from the Ashes. If you care at all about the setting and story, essentially what happens here is that humanity has traveled to this new planet called Enoch. They tried to find a home. When they got there, this mysterious signal drew them to it. They tried to discover what it was, and in doing so, unleashed this like anomaly that took over the planet with these massive storms, destroying technology and summoning all sorts of deadly creatures. But also, as a fringe benefit, it gave humans magical powers, so that's great. And that's where the Outriders come in, which are the playable characters. So 4 classes in the game, each of them have their own playstyle, skills, and passives. The Pyromancer is this medium-range conjurer who harnesses explosive volcanic energy. The Trickster is a close-range hit-and-run character. He's all about manipulating the fabric of time and space. The Devastator is your close-range, in-your-face tank that's about brute force as well as defenses. And then the most recently revealed class, the Technomancer, is supposed to be a balance of support and defense and uses these anomaly-powered weaponries. Every single one of the classes has 8 total skills to choose from. You will pick 3 of those to have active at any time. And then beyond the skills, there's this passive skill tree, which has 3 specializations that will offer traits that will tailor to certain play styles. And then I think the final note about classes in this game is there will be a lot of combo potential. They have said specifically that setting up combos for big damage and crowd control will be absolutely required of any players looking to push into the higher world tiers, which is basically, again, their end game progression. Now, it wouldn't be a loot game without loot, so let's talk about how loot is supposed to work here. There'll be lots to collect between armor, weapons, and mods. The loot will also have levels, rarities, and a variety of stats that will be similar to other loot-based games. So there'll be all sorts of different standard weapons you expect, like shotguns, rifles, pistols, and these will all have various values for damage, accuracy, stability, and range. Higher rarity items will have better values, of course, but also special perks. As some examples. We saw shots that slow down enemies, or a boosted crit rate and healing, even shots that create AoE explosion or will inflict freeze on enemies. And then again, there is armor to collect, and that will also have levels, rarities, stats, and perks, and there's 5 armor slots that can be filled. And then of course there's the customization through creating your own Outrider. You're going to get to choose and pick from several facial presets, hair, and marking options. How's like the game's structure? We know it's a looter shooter. We know there's classes. We'll be collecting loot, fighting enemies. Well, basically the way it's going to work is there's a main story, and you'll progress through that, unlocking new zones as you go. And there's all sorts of different biomes from like forests, mountains, and deserts, things like that. But it's not a open world. Rather, it's what they're calling a series of hubs and spokes that will be these instanced off areas. So there's the main story and side quests, as well as world objectives and mini bosses. And those are kind of all the different activities that you will partake in. And then of course, again, there's that world tier system that we talked about. And these are progressively harder enemies that give you better rewards. So every single world tier increases the enemy level, but also gives an increase to legendary drop rate, a chance for higher rarity, as well as higher item levels than your current character level. This is where that end game replayability is coming from. And then just a note to talk about the types of enemies. There'll be a variety, all sorts of different creature types. There's the basic fodder enemies. There's also mini bosses that you'll find out in the world, and then full-on boss fights. So like we're talking RPG, MMO style boss battles. They'll take place in these specific arenas, and they'll be staged, different phases that you progress through. As you do more damage, the boss changes phase. Maybe it changes the environment, but at the very least, it'll change some of the boss abilities and how the encounter plays out. And they've also briefly teased about these monster hunts, which sound basically like what you expect. Like Monster Hunter, you'll be doing monster hunting. You'll go out there, you'll find some clues about monsters, and then you'll have to chase them down in the environment. So that's pretty cool. So that's a recap of all of the basic fundamentals that we knew about the game back in February, and hopefully that catches you up to where we are at the moment. So now let's talk about that gap between that last video and today. Again, there's been several of these developer broadcasts. Each of them were about 30 minutes in length, and we got some real cool specific details. So let's start off by diving a little more into the world tier system. So this is how you fine-tune your difficulty and how you progress through that end game. As you increase the world tiers, enemies' damage, armor, and health, as well as level, are going to be bumped up. They've said that those higher tiers are really where that combo potential between the different classes in the game and setting things up to really lock enemies down and do these crazy amounts of burst damage, it's going to be super necessary as you go up in world tiers. Now, in exchange for these more difficult encounters, you will of course get more rewards, better loot drops, as well as unlocking more accolades, titles or something. I don't know what that's supposed to be. So everyone starts off at world tier 1, and then you scale up as you play based on performance. So this is basically like a separate experience level. Besides your character level, you will be earning world tier experience in combat. As you go out and fight enemies, you gain world tier experience. You get enough, you unlock the next tier, and then you can go ahead and change the tier to that higher tier, making everything harder, giving you better loot. However, if you die, you lose a percentage of that world tier advancement, and this can actually bump you down world tiers. So basically, if you try to go into a world tier that's beyond the capability of you and your group, you die too many times, you will lose access to that world tier and will have to, I guess, grind back up to unlock it again. The difficulty of the gameplay is also going to scale with the group size. So you can do things solo. As you add more players, the difficulty becomes harder. So that's the world tiers. They touched a little bit on some of the unique equipment in this game. Not very specific here, but basically they said that there will be equipment that will give you passives to do things like reduce cooldowns or increase the duration of certain skills. But beyond that, there is going to be equipment that alters skills on a more fundamental level with some drastic changes. So as an example, we saw the Seismic Commander's armor, which added 2 additional strike targets to the Impale ability, as well as increased Earthquake's range by 60%. And I'm hoping they get a little more crazy with this, because it's really one of the best things about loot games is when they really push the envelope with how gear can change up the gameplay. Now let's talk about the journey and the structure, how the game is set up. So again, you'll be exploring various sections of the world. Each of them have their unique biomes, cities, and enemies to fight. And this is where that hub and spoke structure that we talked about earlier comes in. Hubs are those cities that are filled with NPCs. You go to talk to NPCs, learn about the lore of the world, trade with characters, and then also pick up your quest. And the spokes are those combat arenas and free roam areas. So that main story will take you on a set path through an area, and then the various spokes come off of that. And essentially, side quests will happen in those spokes outside of the main quest path. And if you don't do the side quest, you can actually miss a significant portion of the world. Like if you take a look at just this one map and you see all these spokes that aren't the main quest, that's a rather large amount of play space that if you just blitz through the main story, you would completely miss. In addition to that, the rewards from side quest will scale with your level. So this is going to make it so that it's viable at any point within your gameplay progression. You can always go back to areas, do side quests that you missed, and get rewards that make that worth your time. As the story progresses and as you do side quests and everything, the hubs will grow and change, and that's going to kind of evolve to make the world feel more alive and responsive to what you're doing. They also touched on that Outrider truck, which is that mobile base of operation. In this, you'll have a weapon vendor, crafting, as well as a crew of NPCs, and there's some customization tied to this. It's not like a vehicle that you yourself will be driving around. This is actually just taking you from one location to the other. It's just a base that moves with you as you move across the world. They showed a little bit about UI customization, how there's going to be lots of options to add and remove features, like damage numbers, minimap, the XP bar, the quest tracker. Basically, it looks like you can remove just about everything from the UI if you want. So whether or not you want more info and details or just a more cleared up screen, you're going to have that option. All right, so now let's talk about the classes. They really dove into quite a bit of detail on the three main classes, and then they teased the newest class. So starting things off with the Trickster, this is going to be for players who like to jump in and out of fights. The powers with this character focus on manipulating space and time. Every single class in this game will have its own unique healing effect. There's no like health packs to pick up or potions or anything. Healing happens through combat, but is different for every class. For the Trickster in particular, attacking enemies in close range is what restores his HP. So there's 8 skills, as I mentioned earlier, for every class. You start with 1 and you unlock more as you level. They gave examples of 4 of the 8 skills for the Trickster. There's Temporal Slice, which is the first power you unlock. It's your bread and butter ability. It will paralyze enemies hit by it and is really effective with skills that can clump enemies up. There's Borrow Time, where you gain a % of your max health as a shield, and this also creates a time clone that you can activate a second time to return back to its position. Lots of movement potential in here, setting up different scenarios, really. There's the Slow Trap ability, which creates this dome that will slow enemies and projectiles within it. And then finally, they showed us Hunt the Prey, which will highlight any visible enemy, and then you can use it again to teleport behind them, gain a shield, and slow that enemy down. Besides the skills, as we mentioned, there are class trees. The Trickster's 3 branches focus on movement, damage, and disruption. Now let's move on to the Pyromancer. This is for players who like to take on hordes of enemies at once. It's all about fighting in the mid-range. Not a lot of movement skills, but tons of area of effect abilities. 3 core fundamentals for the Pyromancer are Explosive, Immobilize, and Ignite. So there are a lot of thermal and fire-based abilities. Melee will do fire damage, and then you heal by killing enemies marked with a fire debuff. The 4 abilities they talked about here are Thermal Bomb, which will set enemies ablaze and deal damage over time. If an enemy dies, it then explodes, dealing more area of effect damage to enemies around it. There's Ash Blast, which will cover enemies in an area with ash. This is basically an immobilized crowd control ability, kind of like a freeze. There's Heat Wave, which summons a wall of fire that moves in a straight line and also applies a damage over time. And then Overheat initially does a small amount of damage to enemies in a large area. You can trigger bonus damage to any enemies that are marked with your debuff. And the skill trees for the Pyromancer, the 3 branches focus on dot damage, skill damage, and tankiness. Next up, we've got the Devastator. This is all about slugging it out with enemies toe to toe. It's got a large amount of base health and armor and tons of interrupt abilities. The focus here is around gravitational and earth-based skills, and they also focus on applying bleed damage. Healing with the Devastator happens when enemies die when within close range of you, and the 4 abilities we got to see were Gravity Leap, where you hover in the air, activate it again to slam down into an enemy, doing AoE damage, as well as interrupting skills. That's a pretty damn good ability. There's Reflect Bullets, where you activate activate the shield that will catch bullets, and then you activate it again to launch those bullets back at enemies. There's Impale, which will summon an earth spike under enemies, interrupting skills, and then if you kill someone with this, it will regen health and armor of you and your group. And then finally, we saw Endless Mass, where you release the spinning obelisk, which sucks enemies towards its center. And the 3 trees for the Devastator focus on close range combat, tankiness, and dealing damage over time. And then in this co-op gameplay reveal trailer, we got the reveal of the 4th class, the Technomancer. Not a lot of specific details about this one, but the abilities that we saw on display included the ability to summon turrets, throw out these grenades, and then summon a rocket launcher. So that's the recap of all the new information that we got, as well as the basics about this game. It's a pleasant surprise. Like, this thing is really, the more I see and learn about it, I think the better it looks. Now, I will say, you know, it's not like a super polished AAA looking experience from what we've seen. Some of it does look a tad stiff. I would say some of the world detail appears to be a little lacking. But overall, I'm absolutely looking forward to this. As someone who's a fan of loot games, I've played a lot of different looter shooters and more or less enjoyed them all for various reasons. And I'm hoping that this can be another one that I kind of add to my catalog of games that I like. I think it's always nice to get new games coming out that you can look forward to. And that's the kind of thing that I try to do when I make videos like this. Like, if there are games on the horizon that I feel like I would be interested in playing, I really like to dive in, learn everything that I can about it, and I guess look forward to. I like looking forward to things. It's not a terribly bad thing. We'll have to see how this thing turns out. Again, it's supposed to be launching this holiday, so that is within the next 3 months. We should be getting this game. Some pretty cool stuff. I think that there's some potential in everything that we've seen and what they've talked about. It looks pretty cool. I'm looking forward to this. Happy to learn a bunch about it and share that with you guys, and hope you like this video. And yeah, that's it. Keep our fingers crossed this turns out to be a good game. All right. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Tschüss.